Christmas morning arrived quietly, far too quietly. The silence in the house weighed on me, thick and heavy, as if it was a presence of its own. I was sitting in the kitchen, staring at the empty cup in front of me. The smell of coffee lingered, but the warmth was gone. The house felt cold. I looked across the room toward the worn armchair where Ethan, my husband, always sat. He was buried behind the pages of his newspaper, as usual. I couldn't help but notice the way he had changed over the years. The man who used to joke around and fill the room with his laughter was now a shadow of himself, his presence no longer stirring any excitement in me. Ever since he hit 60, it was like he'd given up on life. We had grown distant, and no matter how hard I tried to talk to him, it felt like I was trying to speak to someone who had already drifted far away, a stranger in his own home. It didn't help that his attention always seemed to be elsewhere on the television, the newspaper, or just lost in his thoughts. I could feel the familiar emptiness settle in me. I was still the same woman who craved excitement, who wanted more from life. Sure, I was 50 now, but my heart didn't feel any older. I still had needs, desires, dreams that went unfulfilled. Ethan wasn't the man who could meet any of them anymore. I sighed, staring at the clock on the wall. It was just past 8 in the morning, and the house felt like it had been frozen in time. I needed to do something, anything, to break the monotony, to fill this void that had only deepened over the years. I stood up and walked into the bedroom. I opened the closet door and pulled out a red skirt, the one I had bought on a whim months ago, and a blouse with a neckline that I knew would catch anyone's eye. I wanted to make an effort today, even if it was only for me. Maybe, just maybe, I could get Ethan's attention. Maybe he'd say something to remind me of the man I had once loved, the man I still hoped was somewhere inside him. I took my time, putting on my boots and adjusting my blouse in front of the mirror. The reflection staring back at me seemed unfamiliar, like a woman I hadn't seen in years. A woman who had hidden herself behind the responsibilities of marriage and life. But today, I wanted to feel like myself again. With a deep breath, I walked into the living room, my heels clicking on the wooden floor. Ethan didn't even look up from his newspaper as I approached. His eyes didn't leave the page, and his silence was louder than any words could be. A wave of frustration swept over me. I had hoped, foolishly, maybe today would be different, but he hadn't even noticed. The emptiness inside me only deepened. It felt like the last piece of something I had been holding on to. A part of me that still cared had cracked. But I wasn't ready to give up, not today. It was Christmas after all. It had to be different. I tried to shake off the disappointment and focused on the task at hand. I moved toward the kitchen to arrange the Christmas cookies on the counter. The smell of freshly baked treats filled the air, but it couldn't reach me. I felt distant, even from the warm scent. That's when I heard it, the sound of an engine rumbling in the driveway. My heart skipped a beat, and I instantly knew who it was. The unmistakable sound of a car pulling up to the gate sent a shiver down my spine. It was Oscar, my stepson. But how? No one had mentioned he was coming today. Ethan hadn't said a word about it this morning. Was this a surprise? Oscar had been away for 3 years, ever since he left home as a young man to pursue his own path. It had been 3 years since I'd seen him, and in that time he had changed. He wasn't the same boy who had left. Now, at 27, he was a man broad, shouldered, tall, with a presence that was impossible to ignore. I watched through the window as he got out of the car, a confident stride to his movements. He was all grown up, and for a moment I could hardly breathe. My hands trembled as I arranged the cookies. But it wasn't just the cold or the uncertainty of the moment. It was Oscar. His arrival stirred something deep within me. I had not expected it, but I couldn't deny that there was something about him, something that I hadn't felt in years. As he walked toward the house, I could feel my heart racing. There was a pull between us, an unspoken connection that had always been there, lingering in the background. The last few months before he left were full of unspoken words, stolen glances, and a tension that neither of us had addressed. And now he was back. The doorbell rang, and my heart thudded painfully in my chest. Ethan didn't move. He sat there, still buried in his newspaper, as if nothing had changed. I didn't even bother to look at him. I was already done trying to get his attention. With shaking hands, I opened the door, and there he was, Oscar. His deep blue eyes met mine, and I felt a wave of warmth rush through me. His gaze swept over me quickly, but the intensity of it was unmistakable. I tried to hide the excitement that bubbled up inside me, but it was impossible to ignore. He was no longer the boy I once knew. He had transformed into a man who made my pulse race with just one look. "Hey, Lily," he said, his voice deep and mature. I didn't know what to say, how to react. It was like he had stepped right out of my memories, bringing with him the weight of all those unspoken moments we had shared. For a second, I was lost in his gaze, but I quickly pulled myself back to reality. "Hi, Oscar," I replied, trying to sound casual, but my voice trembled slightly. Oscar smiled, his eyes never leaving mine. There was something in his look, something that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in years. Something stirred within me, something I thought I had forgotten. As he walked past me into the house, I couldn't help but notice how everything around us seemed to shift. The atmosphere felt charged, as though this Christmas, this moment, was about to change everything. Oscar settled at the table, his presence filling the room, and I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was different now. Ethan, still oblivious, remained focused on preparing the food, barely acknowledging his son's return. Oscar's gaze kept drifting to me, and I realized that these weren't accidental glances. He was looking at me, truly looking at me, in a way that made my heart flutter. His compliments were soft, genuine, and they made me feel like I mattered, like I was seen. I wasn't sure when it started, but by the time we were sitting down to dinner, I couldn't deny the chemistry between us. There was something in the air, a tension that no one else seemed to feel but me. I was caught in it, swept up in the unspoken words between us, and it left me breathless. Ethan stayed lost in his own world, oblivious to the change in the air. But Oscar noticed everything. His eyes never left me, and with every glance, every word he spoke, I felt like I was being pulled deeper into something I couldn't escape. The night felt different now. Despite the warmth of the room and the glow of the candles, something had shifted. Ethan had become increasingly distant, absorbed in his thoughts as usual, leaving me to quietly observe Oscar. He was so much older, now so much more of a man. I couldn't deny the change in him, nor the change in how I felt. My eyes kept straying to Oscar as we ate. I noticed how his eyes lingered on me more than they ever had before. Subtle glances, small smiles, moments of connection that no one else seemed to notice. Was I imagining it, or had everything truly changed in the years since he left? Ethan didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. He was lost in whatever was on the television, indifferent to the air thick, with something I couldn't quite define. The silence between Oscar and me was laden with tension, and the air around us seemed charged with an energy neither of us dared to acknowledge. After dinner, the conversation dwindled. I noticed Oscar standing up and stretching as if he had somewhere to be. He didn't say much, just muttered something about the cold air outside before slipping out the door. I hesitated for a moment, my heart pounding at the thought of following him. Why did it feel like I was being pulled in, drawn to him in a way I couldn't understand? Finally, I couldn't resist any longer. I excused myself from the table and quietly walked out the back door after him. The night air was brisk, and I wrapped my cardigan tightly around me. Snow had begun to fall softly, blanketing the ground in white. Oscar was standing by the fence, his gaze fixed on the horizon. For a moment, I just watched him, not knowing what to say. "I thought I'd get some fresh air," he said casually, as if he'd been expecting me. His voice was calm, but there was something behind his words I couldn't ignore. His eyes met mine, and for a second, the world seemed to slow down. "Yeah, it's peaceful out here," I replied, unsure of what else to say. My heart was racing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Oscar turned to face me more fully. "You've changed, you know, not just in how you look, but—" He trailed off for a moment, like he wasn't sure how to finish. "You seem different, more sure of yourself." The words made me uneasy, but there was something about the way he said them, something that felt honest and not at all judgmental. I swallowed hard, trying to find the right words. "I guess I have changed," I said quietly, looking down at my hands. "A lot can happen in a few years." Oscar stepped closer, and I could feel the heat of his presence, even though the night air was cold. "I've missed you, Lily. I know it's been a while, but I think about you often." His words made my breath catch in my throat. It was like he had been thinking the same thing all along. How could he have known that I had been feeling the same? But I couldn't admit it, not yet. I don't know what to say, Oscar," I murmured. My voice felt small against the pounding of my heart. Oscar took a step closer, his breath visible in the air between us. His eyes locked onto mine, and the space between us seemed to shrink. "You don't have to say anything," he said softly, his tone almost a whisper. "I just want you to know that I see you. I've always seen you." I swallowed hard, my chest tight. There was so much I wanted to say, so much I wanted to ask him. But I was paralyzed by his words, by the closeness between us. "Oscar, we can't," I started, but he raised a hand, gently silencing me. "I know," he said with a soft smile. "But that doesn't mean it doesn't matter. I've spent years thinking about this moment, about you." For a moment, neither of us said anything. I wasn't sure what he was expecting me to do. I wasn't even sure what I wanted anymore. But the space between us felt impossibly small now, as if there were no more barriers to hide behind. Before I knew it, Oscar reached out and brushed a strand of hair from my face, his fingers lingering on my skin. The touch was light, almost delicate, but it sent a jolt of electricity through me. "You are right," I whispered, barely able to hear my own voice. "We can't. But I don't know how to make it stop, Oscar. I don't know what this is between us." He smiled again, his hand moving to rest gently on my arm. "I don't think we need to know everything right now. We don't have to figure it all out tonight, but I can't pretend I don't feel this." I nodded, unable to speak. There were so many emotions rushing through me, so many questions I couldn't answer. But I couldn't deny the pull I felt toward him, the way everything inside me was drawn to him like a magnet. "I've always wanted you," he admitted quietly, his voice low. I've always thought about you in ways I shouldn't have." The confession hit me harder than I expected. It was as if he had opened a door to something I wasn't ready for, but something I couldn't deny. I stepped back slightly, as if to create space between us, but he didn't move away. "I think about you too," I said before I could stop myself. It was the truth, even if it scared me to admit it. Oscar stepped closer again, his gaze not leaving mine. "Then why are we standing here pretending nothing's changed?" "I don't know," I murmured, my heart pounding in my chest. My mind screamed at me to stop, to turn away, but my body wouldn't listen. It was as if the gravity between us had become too strong, pulling me in, making me forget all the reasons we shouldn't cross this line. Oscar leaned in then, his lips brushing mine softly at first, like a question, as if waiting for me to respond. And I did. I kissed him back, slowly, cautiously, as if testing the waters, feeling the electricity between us. When we finally pulled away, I was breathless, my heart hammering in my chest. "I don't know what this is," I said softly, my voice trembling. Oscar smiled gently, his thumb brushing across my cheek. "I think we'll figure it out together." The words hung in the air, both comforting and terrifying at once. I didn't know what this meant for us, for Ethan, for everything, but I knew that nothing was the same anymore. And somehow that felt both thrilling and unsettling.